And welcome back to another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports Podcast where I, Richard Harris, talk about why I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s to today. Today's topic is just something that just dawned on me and is on my mind that I wanted to share with you. And that topic today is college football. I think I learned something today. And it's something that I think is interesting if you follow college football. First and foremost, officiating in college football is atrocious. They don't call pass interference. They make penalty calls. They're influenced by fans sometimes. They essentially blow the whistle sometimes when they shouldn't. They make announcements that are wrong. And I used to think that college football referees are people learning to referee for the professional ranks. But some of those people, I think, just simply like college football. As I'm watching this Penn State-Ohio State football game, I just saw a play right now that just happened, a nice throw and catch. But the guard on the inside literally grabbed the defensive tackle and there was no holding call. It is being played at Ohio State Stadium. The announcers didn't see it. Maybe they did see it, but because nothing was said about it, they just let it play. So why pick on the referees? I'm not going to pick on the referees. I'm just going to tell you something that I think I noticed. I think I'm figuring out why I have issues with officiating today and didn't have officiating issues in the 80s and 90s. And it's because of one major difference between the 80s and 90s than today. In the 80s and 90s, they didn't throw the ball as much. There was only a handful of teams that actually knew how to throw the football. In the 80s and 90s, the University of Miami tortured people because they could throw the football and they had the speed on the outside on defense to be able to shut down option football, which was the norm of football in those days. Penn State, they could throw the football, but they wanted to run it more. But they had the players who could chase the plays down sideline to sideline. Today, I was watching it's Army versus Air Force, or it's Navy versus Air Force football match. And the service academies crack me up because the service academies play football like it's 1940, like it's 1950. And if you can't coach the triple option or any kind of option, you can't coach at the service academies. And they all run the same plays. They can't throw to save their lives, but they do. But they can run the football. And I crack up when I hear the announcers say, Navy rushes for 383 yards a game, or Air Force rushes for 280 yards a game, Army rushes for 275 yards a game. And you watch this and you say, how do they do it? How is the style of the 1940s still appealing to today? And it is appealing because it is so cool to watch when they hand the ball off to the fullback when they run the option and they keep giving him the ball play after play after play, and he breaks one. He's not the fastest guy. He's just a good running back. Or when all the blocking works perfectly and the pitch is perfect and the running back gets the pitch and he takes it to the house 65, 70 yards. The quarterback fakes the pitch and he goes 65, 75 yards. That is what college football was in the 70s and into the 80s. It died in the 90s. But Georgia Tech ran it and ran it well. And I find it funny that no team runs those plays other than the Service Academy today. But see, here's what's funny though. What's funny is the Service Academies do those plays, but everyone else in the nation today runs the same plays, runs the same single back, quarterback in the shotgun, one back beside him or two, mostly it's one back, three wide receiver set, and they basically run the option principle. They call it now run pass option, as opposed to being triple option, speed option, or the option. And it's hilarious. Every team runs the same plays. It's just different times of the games when they don't run the play. And so in the 80s and 90s, the officiating was better only because they didn't have to call pass interference. They didn't have to call illegal hand check or hands contact on a receiver in the 80s and 90s, because you got to catch that, because nobody threw it except for a handful of teams. And I'm going through the Rolodex of my head of styles that were played. Oklahoma, Colorado, they ran the option into the 90s. Florida State, no, they started the single back. They copied Florida and did the single back option thing where the multiple receivers, one running back, sometimes running back and a fullback, but also ran a pro style offense. Of course, I already said Miami. Miami really took it to another level. Trying to think, USC never ran the option. They just student body right, student body left. And they could throw it. Same thing with UCLA. They could just throw it. Other teams in their conference, I think, did the same thing. I'm trying to think about Washington. Washington in 91, when they won the national championship, they were a basic pro-style offense. And so my point simply is that teams in the 80s and the 90s kept the game simple. You stop us running, we're going to try to throw on you. If you stop us throwing and running, we're SOL. And so the officiating didn't have to do much work. All they had to do was call holding, call offsides, call chop blocks, call all the things that comes with the running game. Call a face mask here, call simple penalties, and the sport was simple. The sport's not simple anymore. We at home as a fan, we sit and we watch games and we say, how in the world is that not pass interference? How in the world is that not holding on the receiver? How is that not offensive pass interference? And every year, college football referees, College Football Association try to explain their rules. Every year, they try to create new rules. Every year, they try to expand interpretation of new rules. And I find it fascinating that why didn't they just keep it simple? Why didn't they stick with keeping it simple? And so I don't understand certain things about the game today. That makes zero sense. I mean, they put a rule in years ago that said, well, you can if a receiver goes down the field and after 5 yards you can't touch him. Well, every time I watch a game, a receiver is running down the field being mugged by a defensive back, and sometimes they call it, sometimes they don't. I watch a game where a receiver is running down the field and the receiver is the one doing the mugging, pushes off, illegally blocks. They don't make the call. Sets a pick so the other receiver can get open, which is offensive pass interference. They don't call. Hand fighting. What is hand fighting? Hand fighting shouldn't be involved in running for a pass. Arm bar. That shouldn't be involved in running for a pass or whatever. But it seems to be. And I don't get it. Why is it not called? Why is it called sometimes? Why is it not called all the time? And I just watching this a service academies game right now and seeing them just run the football, and now the games are so fast. I'm watching this Penn State Ohio State game that started at 9, a little after 9 a.m., and it's not even in the fourth quarter, and we're 2 hours and 47 minutes in, and it's 10-6. It's not like it's 35-31, and the clock is stopping all the time. I mean, there's a stupid penalty right there by Ohio State to stop the clock. But the point is, the Service Academy games go fast. Unless the other team they're playing is throwing it and the ball's being incomplete, or they're throwing it and it's incomplete. But today I'm sitting here watching, I'm like, now I kind of get why the officiating does what it does, why it's not so good today, and how yesteryear it was better because they didn't have to call pass interference. Because these teams are watching the Service Academy's team run and 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 run. And the officials don't have much to do unless they see a holding. Watch a Service Academy game. Watch how fast their games go against each other. I mean, Service Navy plays Notre Dame a lot. Army plays Notre Dame once in a while. CBS shows a lot of the Service Academy games, or the Army Navy game happens in December every year. Watch that game. That game is a long game only because of the pageantry, the stories, the things that are happening that have nothing to do with the game. Just the halftime show is pretty long. If the president decides to show up to the game, I mean, like there's silly things like that that make the games longer than normal football game between the service academies. And especially if a president is a graduate of one of the service academies, the game is a little long because, he wants to get his seat. And there's, things that they do to honor him for being there. And so this December, watch the Army and Navy game and see exactly what I mean in terms of what I'm saying. Not a lot of penalties, unless they're getting a lot of holding calls. And so it's kind of funny that officiating is relatively become new in college football because everybody throws it. Everybody runs it, but most people throw it. And so one of my shorter shows, it is a Saturday. I'm mentally engrossed in college football and trying to figure out stuff in my own personal life. But I just thought I'd share that with you as to when you're sitting at home watching a game and you're wondering why they don't call pass interference when it's clearly pass interference. I think it's because, number one, they're not physically fit to keep up with the officials. I think, number two, they don't know what pass interference is. I think that, three, I think they could call it on either person, and so they say, well, I could call it on you too, but I flipped a coin in my mind and said, throw the flag now. And I think, number four, it's a new phenomenon in college football because in the 80s and 90s, not many teams threw the ball. Teams won championships by running it down your throat. And so when you had a special quarterback like Dan Marino come up and he's throwing it all over the place, or Jim Kelly coming out and he's throwing it all over the place, then you're like, okay, passing happens. It just doesn't happen that much in college football. Think about it. Alabama used to run the option like crazy. Georgia had Herschel Walker, George Rogers from South Carolina. I can run off 15 names of running backs as to why teams ran the football in the 80s. Barry Sanders. I mean, come on. Marcus Allen, Charles White, James Wilder. I mean, college football was a running sport until the Florida schools started winning championships back to back and everyone started to follow it. So then everyone else started copying the Florida schools. Actually, it was Utah. Urban Meyer was head coach at Utah. Utah had that kind of style of the single back and the quarterback's all creative and crafty with the ball, and Alex Smith could throw it and run it. And he followed Steve Spurrier to Florida, and boom, it exploded. But teams today throw it more than they run it. And again, we already went over that in the NFL. That's why they make your running back position obsolete in the NFL. At least they're trying to. But it's going to be harder to do as quarterbacks keep getting hurt. But that's another topic. That's another rule. Roughing the passer. They didn't call roughing the passer that much in the 80s and 90s in college football. Quarterbacks didn't pass. Anyway, enjoy your Saturday. I'm Richard Harris, and thanks for listening.